Okay, so in our notes, we're going to be looking at division. So when it says dividing polynomials, it's our inverse operation of multiplication. So I think a lot of people forget that you can check your answer by going forwards. But this part right here, y'all, is actually review from Algebra 1. So we're going to do this, we're going to look at this example, and then I'm going to do these two with you. And you might not even remember remotely doing this, but that's okay. It says basic division. When dividing a polynomial expression by a single term, the process, it says, is quite simple because you're just dividing by a binomial. So do you all remember that the definition of a monomial is a single term, right? So what we have here is it's telling us to take this trinomial, and just like you did the past couple days, you were adding these things, you were subtracting them, you were multiplying, but now we have to do division, okay? Now notice we are dividing by 2a, and 2a is what we call a monomial. So what you're going to be doing is, we're not actually going to be doing this, but I want to make sure you remember, this is kind of, you had it when you were in like 4th grade, and then you learned when you got older that division is fractions. Okay, and there's a rule in math that states the following, and actually my pre-calc classes they were like, I don't remember this. But when you're dividing by a single term, you can divide and kind of separate this trinomial into 3 like mini division problems. So if you notice, they did 4a to the third divided by 2a. They took the middle term. Y'all with me? See what they did? Okay, and what happens is when we start to look at how they simplify this, you need to know your exponent rules. You ready? So let's see, how did they get from here to here? Okay? Now, so I'll try to zoom in a little bit more to make it bigger. Okay, so we have, now y'all look, let's just focus on this first one. What's 4 divided by 2? So I know it says 4a to the third divided by 2a, but I kind of take those monomials and think about coefficients and variables. So what's 4 divided by 2? 2, see where they got the 2? And then a to the third divided by a. Well, this a will cancel out with one of the a times a's, so we're left with a squared. So that's where they're getting 2a squared from that one. You with? Okay, let's go on. Minus 6a squared divided by 2a. Well, 6 divided by 2 is 3. A squared, which is a times a, divided by a. The a on the bottom cancels with one of the a's on the top, and we're left with minus 3a. And then minus 12a divided by 2a. Well, a divided by a is what? What's a divided by a? 1, not 0. And then 12 divided by 2 is 6. Okay? So I'm going to get you started, and then I want you to simplify these out. Okay? So it says divide each polynomial, it'll get clear in a minute, by the monomial. So keep in mind, this is just a review right now because these are monomials. It's going to get a little stickier. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to write the trinomial, and we can divide each term. That's supposed to be an x. What am I doing? 3x. I kept thinking a's. Plus 12x divided by 3x minus 18 over 3x. Okay? So go ahead and simplify that. All right, let's check and see how you did. Okay? 9x squared divided by 3x is 3x. Yes or no? Good there? Okay? 12x divided by 3x, I think you can see the x is canceled to 1. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Now the reason I don't have this part done is because this is where students typically mess up. Y'all, let me ask you a question. Where is this x? Denominator. Does it have anything to cancel with on top? So it's going to stay down there. Okay? And then 3 divided by 3 is 1. And 18 divided by 3 is 9. So that's where I'm getting this last term as minus 9 over x. Now here's the discussion. We'll see who really understood what you started with. Yes? Yeah. Sorry. Wah, 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 right? I did this in my own notes today, Tyler, and you can see my white. I did it again. Don't ask me what I'm doing. Okay. It's Tuesday/really Monday, right? Okay. So 3x plus 4. Now, let's see who really understands this. Do y'all realize the following? That's a trinomial, right? That's a polynomial by definition, right? Doesn't violate anything. And that doesn't. Is our final answer when you divide this polynomial by this monomial, is our final answer a polynomial? No. This was in your notes that you have with me videoing from you were at home. But remember, a polynomial cannot have variables in the denominator. So here's what's interesting. It doesn't mean we did it wrong. It just means that you have some crossover, that just because you start with a polynomial, when you divide, division does funky things, okay? When you multiply a polynomial by a polynomial, it'll always be a polynomial. When you add and subtract them, fine. But when you divide, you're not always going to have that consistency, okay? All right, go ahead and do number 2. I'll buy your lunch some. All right, so check with me up here. Check your answers, and let's see if you have it. So you should have a minus 3b squared plus 2a squared b to the third. Does that look right? Tyler, if I did anything wrong, let me know again. You never know with me, right? All right, if you don't understand this, I'm hoping that you can kind of see my scratch work here. Factor a 5 on the top and a 5 on the bottom cancel. A squared divided by a is a. I think usually everyone's here, usually it's here, they're like, oh, this looks ugly. Remember, this is like saying a to the third is like saying a times a times a. And when you have an a on the bottom, only one of them cancels. So that's where I'm left with a times a. That's equivalent to a squared, okay? And then b to the fourth divided by b to the first, remember those are ones there, okay? So whether you remember, there's actually these things called the Laws of Exponents, which we'll get to and review eventually. But right now, it's enough basic that I think you get it. Now this is just review. Are we going to do a lot of this? Absolutely not, because this is kind of Algebra 1. Now, let me ask you a question though. Is this a polynomial? We did a polynomial divided by a polynomial, which is just one term monomial. Does this violate any problems? Let's see. The coefficients. Usually there's no issues with coefficients. The exponent's 1, a 2, and a 2 and a 3. Is that a polynomial? Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to review that with you. Okay. All right. So now we get to what we need to tackle. So it says the above process does not work if we have something bigger than a monomial. So like a binomial, how many terms does a binomial have? 2. We're going to do a lot of binomials, okay? We're going to start by learning long division, okay? It's the same terminology as in elementary school, but look up here. Instead of doing this, do you remember when you, let's say you were asked to do 55 divided by 2. Does everybody remember 55 divided by 2? Now, do you remember when you set that up for long division, do you remember how long, that's not a square root sign, that's a long division. Do you remember doing stuff like this? Oh, buddy, right? That's what we're going to get into. So what this means is it says, for example, how are we going to do this problem right here? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to set it up. You might want to write this down in your notes just so you kind of remember terminology. But we're going to use what's called, that's not the answer, that's just the setup. That's called long division. And on our long division, what happens is, I know that you have the numerator. Does anybody remember what that's called in long division? The what? So, yeah, we have 3x squared plus 7x minus 12. And I remember like an elementary school teacher would be like, that goes under the umbrella, right? That goes under the long division sign. But this up here, y'all, this whole thing is called the dividend. And you're going to hear me say that. The dividend is your numerator. Does anybody remember what the bottom's called? That's our denominator as a fraction, but in division, does anybody remember what that's called? That's called the divisor. I don't know why that's blurry. Come on. Focus. Oh, there we go. It worked. I just said focus, and it did. So that bottom part's the divisor, and we'll review that, okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video. So I'm going to pause this video, and the link to the video is in your notes. So you saw what we did up here. This was on the video. You saw these. Let's do these together so that I can walk you through, because sometimes the video doesn't make sense to people, but it's a really good preview for me to start and stop it. So here we go. Let's get this set up. Now, as I'm writing this as an old school division problem, Mason asked a great question. He didn't ask me. He basically said, wait a minute. So the divisor out here, x plus 1, can't ever have a higher degree than the numerator. What's this degree of this trinomial? A 2. The degree of this binomial is a 1, so this is going to work, okay? Now, how I think about this is not like the easy bitty one we did at the top. This is a binomial. So when I place, I'm going to go over 2 terms. So in reality, you're asking yourself, how many times does x plus 1 go into x squared plus 3x? And that gets a little intimidating. They're like, what? Well, what he's telling you in the video is we're just going to ignore that. And let's do this. How many times does x, think about this first one and this first one. How many times does x go into x squared? In other words, if you don't understand what that division is, on our graphic organizer, step 1 says divide. X times what, y'all, is x squared? X. You have to put it over here because this has 2 terms. You have to go 2 terms out. Okay? Because how many terms does this have? No. 2. So how many terms do you have to go out? 2. Y'all, you should never put an x above an x squared. See how everything is lined up? It should always be that way, whether it's above the division sign or below it, okay? Step 2 on your graphic organizer says multiply. Let's do that now. You ready? X, you're distributing. So for those of you that are like, what? Aren't we really doing this? X times x plus 1. Well, you would get x squared plus x. That's the same thing you're doing, but it's not written that way. So x times x is x squared. X times 1 is a positive x. Notice you have to put that plus sign there. Okay? Now watch. Immediately, I need you to do this. It's no longer a monomial, and here's why. You're going to hear us say, draw the line, change the sign. Well, draw your line, and we're going to put a big fat subtraction sign right there. You always subtract. Now, this gets hard for people because they don't realize that we're taking a binomial and dividing it by a binomial. So on your graphic organizer, it says, draw the line, change the sign. What that means, y'all, is that means from our work this past section, you need to subtract not only the x squared, but subtract this, right? So just like I started in our warm-up today, you are going to do minus x squared minus x. Well, if you can remember back in the day when you were in elementary school, when you subtract, that's the same thing as adding a negative. So sometimes students are like, oh, that helps you remember. This is the same thing as subtracting the binomial. Do you see how I already distributed the negative to each term? So now it makes it easier for people like, now we can just go. This should always happen. What's x squared plus a negative? That's the same thing, right? Before it said x squared minus x squared, which is what? What's x squared minus x squared? Nada. These should cancel every time. X squared plus a negative x squared is the same thing, okay? So if you don't need to draw your line, change your signs, don't worry about it, but I'm just telling you, those cancel. Oh, I hate when it goes blurry. Okay. Now, what's 3x plus a negative x? 2x. So you're going to write down 2x, and you can't imagine, there is no way you're not done, because look, it doesn't divide into x, we have an empty gap. So now it says bring down. So after you subtract, we're going to bring down, well, we have a term that's left, the constant. So we're going to write 2x plus 6. And y'all, you do it all over again. So if you go to the next video, we'll finish this problem and then finish the rest of our notes.